Welcome to Drams and Dragons, the podcast about hard liquors and even harder fantasy magic systems. Oh, we're going to be talking about Brandon Sanderson today. How you doing, Dustin?
Glad to be back. Feels like it's been a while. With the holidays, got family stuff, whiskey budgets drying up because of the presents. Yeah, things are going good. And I'm on a reread of Dungeon Crawler Carl for our next show where we go into the seventh book.
Looking forward to that.
Yeah, man, I'm still trying to get through the bone ships too, because that's good. And then the whole point of this one was the new Sanderson book is out today, Wind and Truth, which is on the docket for maybe getting to read next year at some point.
I got a big old pile, big stack of books too. So
many books.
At some point we'll get to that. So today we're just gonna sort of chat about Brandon Sanderson, about his work in general, just sort of in a more general sense rather than about any one particular book. Both Dustin and I have some feelings about some takes about Sanderson.
Some hot takes.
Some hot ones. Maybe some stone cold ones. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah. It's interesting that he's kind of a what you call it? It's like a figure who's kind of polarizing.
Yeah, polarizing, divisive almost.
Yeah. You get people they talk about him like he's Jesus for fantasy, and then some people just they can't do any of it. Everything's a do not finish. So
I'm somewhere in between. I don't think he's the best thing ever. I don't hate most of his stuff. I like some of it. I dislike some of it. It's complicated for me.
Already. Some good stuff already.
But before we do that, I am actually going to do a little tasting.
Okay.
I think I'm alone in that tonight, right? Is that correct?
Well, I'm just going to be having a little bit of Talisker Storm. It feels like a Talisker Storm night. So
nice.
I will be dramming with you, but not. We don't have to talk about the storm again. It's amazing if you haven't tried it out there in the world.
Yeah.
But
makes good stuff. I am drinking tonight.
Treat
is Kirkland Signature. Isla single malt Scotch whiskey. It is Kirkland Signatures Isla. I have heard it's not so bad.
Dude, Kirkland they subcontract. It's something else, and they don't tell you what it is.
They do not tell you what it is.
Matured in oak casks. Okay, I don't know why they got to advertise that, but
trying to see who makes it.
Yeah, 50%. This might be a strong one.
There's a lot of reviews out there you can find. I think the one that I had read before that somebody had suggested was Kale Isla. As possibly being the distillery. And the reason that they gave was that there are only so many distilleries with what we would call Costco capacity on the island.
Interesting. Yeah, I'd never thought about that before. They would have to have, the capacity for that.
I'll just say opening the bottle smells pretty good.
Okay.
Nice and smoky. And do a little pour.
Nice little bit of ASMR there with the...
Yeah. Did you get that?
Pour going in. I heard it.
All right.
It was very exciting to hear.
It's got some legs. It doesn't have tons. It's not super oily. It's got a little bit of legs here. Like extremely malty. It's got some sort of general smokiness to it. I honestly can't pick out a particular character of the smoke. Closer to iodine than not, but it's not like full Lefroy. That maltiness just keeps like coming back.
Typically, we get some sort of fruit on the nose. Anything like that?
Getting more malt. Malt and smoke. There's absolutely nothing that I would say is distinctive about it. It's almost distinctive in its lack of distinction. There's nothing offensive about the smell.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm like really desperately trying to like smell something aside from like smoke and like peat and malt.
Really want you to get that experience.
Like peat, malt, and alcohol. Okay. That's what I smell. Those are the smells that I get from this.
Maybe it's like the bottle says, it's like, this is whiskey. Maybe that's what they're going for with it. It's like this whiskey tastes like whiskey.
Yes, I feel like that's what this is gonna be. Is this whiskey just tastes like whiskey? Which so
it's a thing, though. It's a thing.
Now I'm gonna taste it. Okay. I'm gonna actually taste it now. I had some caramel. It's a little bit sweet. It's very malty. Like, no joke, it's extremely malty. Like, it's it's fairly smooth for 50%. It's inoffensive and easy to drink.
Okay. I mean, just right there, that's a good sign for Kirkland. Yeah. It's kind of seems like a crapshoot, but
and I would say this is extremely smoky on the palate. This is a very smoky whiskey. It's kind of sweet. It's got a little caramel. It's very smoky. It's very malty. There's nothing really distinctive about it so far, and there's nothing really terrible about it either. It's just, do you want some smoky as far as the finish? It actually is quite a nice finish. I actually like the finish. The finish is actually maybe my favorite thing about this. Smooth. There's not too much burn, but it's warm. It's like, I get that warmth in your chest sometimes. It's like the pleasant warmth. And then I get tobacco notes on the back end. I find that very pleasant. I really like a tobacco like finish. I get a little bit of the oak, but not overly oaky. Not to the point of it being like spicy or having a spice note that I can pick out. But there's definitely some oak towards the end, towards the finish. You sort of start with a sweetness in the front of your mouth, and then it goes and hits you with the smoke. It hits a little oaky warmth, and then that long tobacco finish.
Cool.
And it's not bad. It was very inexpensive, in the whiskey world, in the Scotch world. There's nothing that's overly harsh or overly weird. There's nothing that sticks out. I don't know if I'd call it round. It's a little bit flat because there's also nothing that stands out. You know what I mean? If there was just some note, any note at all that was outside of the sort of basic profile, I might actually really like it.
Yeah.
The closest sort of thing that I actually do like about it is that finish. I think I remember like last week or whatever we said, or not last week, but the last episode.
Yeah, finish killed it. It's bitter.
The finish killed it. It was like a bitter, horrible finish. In this case, I actually think the finish is the best part about it. And if the finish makes it,
nice.
The finish makes it worthwhile, in my opinion. The finish and the price. I do wish there was some other note. It's just very malt forward. That caramel carries the flavor a little bit. It's very one note.
Yeah, it sounds like a safe whiskey, like that you could buy mass numbers of and people will buy it because it's at a good price.
It's inoffensive. It's a good price for a decent inoffensive whiskey.
It's very Costco. Like,
it is very Costco. It's exactly what you get at Costco. I do wish there was a note, even if it was just a little fruitiness on the nose. Little bit of I think a lot more whiskeys should have like that tobacco finish. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, that's one of my new favorite things since we've been tasting.
I think a chocolate and tobacco finish is like even better.
We're very generous with whiskeys that are meh because it's like, yeah, the experience is great, but it's a difference between that and like, I would buy this whiskey to maybe have as like a sipping whiskey is like my background whiskey. Because if you're just sitting around hanging out, you want something with a nice finish so that when it lingers, it's not offensive. So
yeah,
cool. So just a little pizzazz though, huh?
Yeah, I mean the caramel notes are nice. It's sort of sweet on the front end. That tobacco finish is nice. So yeah, here's the thing: is this whiskey was really affordable, right? It was Costco prices for a bottle of whiskey. Do I recommend it? Depends what you want. I mean, I don't not recommend it. I don't know that I like thoroughly recommend it. It's in a vacuum, I would say, don't bother, go do something else. But it's also really affordable and it's better than a lot of scotches at this price point. The fact that there's just nothing offensive about it. Like if you just want to like serve some scotch to somebody, or maybe you've never tried smoky Islay whiskey and you don't want to spend $100 for a really good bottle and you just want to try something with smoke. Do you like smoke? It's not going to, this whiskey's not offensive. There's nothing like terrible about it. It's just whiskey, but it's smoky whiskey. So maybe it's worth picking a bottle up if you just want to try something with peat.
Cool. Yeah. And Gus, alcohol content wise, how did the 100% hit you?
100 proof.
Yeah, the 100 proof.
Yeah, not bad, which is nice. It's that lack of offensive characteristics. They really were going for, we don't care if it's like, doesn't really have anything that stands out. As long as there's nothing bad that stands out, it'll be all right.
Dude, it's like the Costco hot dog, it's a fine hot dog.
Actually, I actually really like.
Yeah,
I actually really like the Costco hot dog. It's a solid hot dog.
Yeah, it's nothing fancy.
Did you say $2.50?
Yeah, last I checked, it was $2.50 for a hot dog, right?
That's $1.50 with a drink.
Even
$1.50 with a drink.
Oh man, it's even better than my memory. I haven't had Costco in like 4 years.
Oh man, I go to Costco weekly.
Yeah,
love it,
dude. I went a few months ago, and it was like going to heaven a little bit. Because we have BJ's where I'm at. If you haven't been to a BJ's, very disappointing.
Sorry, I'm just really immature about these things.
Oh no, yeah, New England. You'd love New England. There's a lot of stuff like that around here. Right. Constantly stopping myself from giggling.
Gotta go down to the BJ's.
Yep, get BJ's.
New England
is
a silly place. All right.
Yeah, it's interesting for sure. Well, Gus, thanks for taking the risk and trying something new. I don't know what it's like, gambling a little bit, I think, with the Costco stuff.
Yeah.
Like I felt so excited when I saw you had it because you never know.
Happy I decided to, take a risk, roll the dice, give it a try.
Nice. Pretty good segue into Brandon Sanderson, I think.
I feel like this is the Brandon Sanderson of whiskeys.
Yeah, I love it because I think that's my overall take. It's like at first drink, it's not too fancy. It's not overly although, there's some complicated magic systems, but
yeah.
And we'll get more into this, but when I think of Sanderson, I think you don't read it for like the prose that makes you think.
Well, let me just take a minute, and because I know that most of our listeners will know who Brandon Sanderson is.
Mm-hmm.
For the few who might not, Brandon Sanderson is one of the big fantasy authors going, that's currently writing. He's written a whole bunch of work. He's prolific. He writes a ton. I think his three most popular, most famous things are he's written the Mistborn series, the Stormlight Archive, and he originally came to prominence and fame by being the guy who was tapped to write the final 3 books of the Wheel of Time. Like I said, he's prolific. He's written a ton more than this. I mean,
got a lot of young adult titles too.
Yeah, he's got a lot of young adult titles. He wrote, there's a Elantris, that's a famous book, somewhat famous book he's written. I mean, I could go for quite a while talking about everything he's done. He's done some graphic novels. He's done the body of work that he has released, is significant in a relatively short amount of time. This guy is, he's only a little older than us. He's just still in his 40s. He's one of these guys that writes, I think he said in an interview that he writes about 2,500 words a day.
Yeah.
The average author in the world probably writes more like 1,000 words a day because other things pop up in life.
Mm-hmm.
That's just, he writes about 2,500 words a day.
Yeah, he's a very productive guy. He really does a podcast, and he does the podcast while he's signing books.
Yeah.
Like he's interesting use of time, but I think the word like prolific is a great word. Ubiquitous, it's just one of those guys. It's like one of the biggest names in fantasy.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically like if you look at like who's writing right now, and I'm going to exclude guys like George R.R. Martin and Patrick Rothfuss because I'm not actually sure they're actually writing. They're talking about like the people who are actually writing and publishing books on a regular basis currently today. It's like Brandon Sanderson, Sarah J. Maas, and a few other names that are at that level, right? Where they're writing a ton, they're selling boatloads of copies. He is also Mormon.
Mm-hmm.
Some people will be like, who cares? Some people will be like kind of triggered by that. And we can talk about that. It affects his work. There's some Mormon themes throughout his work. He insists his work is not allegory. He's said that multiple times. And I believe him, but nonetheless, it still has these themes running throughout it. It's just who he is. Everybody, the writing is the product of the guy. Like that's true for everyone.
Yeah. And in this version, last time we talked about with the thousandfold thought, like the background to that was nihilism. The background to Sanderson, when the Mormon stuff does come out, it's the opposite of nihilistic. It's like a hopefulness. It's a lot of kind of humanistic views of the world, and it's always interesting when you read them because you can't separate it. Like you can see it there.
Yeah.
Especially if you grew up around Mormons, which I think we did. I grew up in the Southwest, and tons of Mormons out there. I was lucky enough I dated someone who was Mormon, and it was cool talking with her about some of the themes, and that's something I could bring up later. But just it's something I love about his books, and something that's really challenging for me is when he gets into his characters' head spaces. That's where a lot of the Mormonism comes out. I see a lot of the self-reflection.
See, I see a lot of it in the structure of like the Cosmere, because I listed all of these books, right, that he's written, and all these series and all these things. Yeah. But most of his work is part of this shared universe shared like multiverse called the Cosmere. Essentially, all of these books are ultimately linked in some way, even if they superficially don't appear to be. And in that Cosmere, there are certain ideas that are shared across all these series and all these books. And a lot of those ideas are clearly at least inspired by his Mormonism. And I don't want to like knock him a whole bunch for this. I just think it's worth talking about at some point because it does affect the work. And there are these ideas that get into it. And I think it's interesting. I don't know how important it is. Is it important? It's not particularly important to me, except that I kind of find it interesting and noteworthy, the way that I would looking at any author's background and how it affects their work.
I'd say same boat.
Like Glenn Cook, Vietnam veteran, or Haldeman writing the Forever War, like Vietnam veteran, and like how did those views that were shaped by who they, the experiences they had, how did that shape the work that they did later? Yeah, I think that's just for me, like so it's interesting to talk about, think about.
Agreed.
And I know he has insisted it's not allegory.
Yeah, I'm with you too. I believe him.
Yeah. I mean, just same way that Tolkien always insisted it isn't allegory. I think it's usually pretty obvious when it's allegory. It's like C.S. Lewis-y stuff, right?
Yeah, that's Jesus.
Yeah,
that lion is definitely
the lion is Jesus. Yep.
Come on. Gonna beat you over the head with it a little bit.
Yeah.
And I actually got to say that's something. I want to be very gracious to Brandon today because I actually really appreciate that in this book, especially after the last book we read, where it felt a little bit like you're getting beat over the head with nihilism and like trying to force a point of view on you.
Yeah. I don't ever feel reading Sanderson. I've never felt like, oh, he's trying to force, these, like Mormon ideas in. He's not. I don't think that he is. I think he's sort of inspired by them, like anybody is by their belief system and who they are and everything. But I don't think I've heard people talk about the fact that he's Mormon and these ideas are in there in a very negative light. And I just want to say, I don't think it's a negative light. I just think it's who he is and what he's writing from,
And I've been kind of wanting to have this conversation for a while because that there's an odd amount of controversy around Sanderson. And I think it's because he is so successful.
There's going to be controversy anytime somebody finds success, just as an example of the level of success that he's achieved. Like he's the kind of guy who has the level of success that's kind of like, it's like, I would call it like Taylor Swift levels of success, where he's able, just through the force of his sort of the gravity of how many sales he makes, where he's able to like affect how platforms, produce and publish and release and all that stuff, content, and he's able to negotiate his own rates for these things. And he's just because an example of that is a number of years ago, and it is still true to some extent. But Audible, which is Amazon's, audiobook platform, that they had bought it up and Amazonified it. And he was basically like, this is a raw deal, like this for authors. And he has pushed and really made headways in making audiobooks, the audiobook space, less sort of financially toxic for indie, for himself, but also for indie authors and other sort of less well-known authors. That's how big he is, right? Yeah. That's how big this guy. I mean, this guy Brandon Sanderson is like a force in the industry, not just as a writer himself, but as a sort of advocate for other writers. It's actually really cool. It's really cool, and he doesn't have to be that, but he is.
Yeah.
He's the kind of guy that can go on. He's the kind of guy that, like, during the pandemic, he stopped having to do things like go to conventions and go to signings and go do all these things. And he spent all that extra time writing.
That was the coolest thing too. I remember being so excited about it. So, go back in time. It's 2020 or 2019.
Yeah. That was 2020, lockdown. 2021. Yeah.
Yeah. Everyone's all mad.
Locked down.
Inside. Schools are, stopped. And so Brandon Sanders, he gets on Reddit and he says, "Hey, I'm going to write a bunch of books."
Yeah. Or no, not I'm gonna. I did.
Yeah. I've written. Yeah.
Written. He said, I've written all these books. It was nuts.
Because remember that structure too, because it was all on what's that site you go to and you can spend money and
Kickstarter.
Yeah, it was a Kickstarter thing.
He did it. He kickstarted it.
Yep. So you could go on, and it wasn't that bad. It's like give them like $40 and you get access to all the books when they roll out. Mm-hmm. And he kind of teased it with the covers, like with the cover art. You could see him after a little bit. Yeah. And it was something like 6 books.
I think it was 5 books. Yeah. It sounds right to me. But he made before a single one had been published, he had made millions of dollars, millions of dollars, because people were just excited to read his stuff and were willing to pay for it.
Yeah.
And this was stuff that he was doing outside of the normal series, like like outside of the Stormlight Archive or Mistborn or any of those major popular series.
And he still paid homage to that. He had a Stormlight. Yeah, he had a Cosmere novel in there. Some really cool original works, just it's like real fleshed out short stories. I think I got to read all of them except for Dress.
That's funny because that's the one I actually bought that one for Crystal.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, the Tress and the Emerald Sea or whatever it's called. I got that for Crystal because he wrote that book for his own wife.
Oh, cool.
But because he was not doing all this other shit, all the sort of secondary shit that writers have to do to actually make money and sell books, because he wasn't having to do any of those other things, he was able to write all of these extra books during the lockdown, basically during the 2 years or whatever that he was like stuck at home, not having conventions and shit. Right.
Yeah.
But he was able to just like go on Kickstarter and just sell these things for like millions of dollars. This is not like a sustainable model for like other writers to do usually.
Right.
But for him, people just want to read. People want to read his shit. People want to read his shit. They do. And it's huge.
Yeah. And it was, I remember reading it and it was just like, this is going to get me through the pandemic. Mm-hmm. Like I have stuff to do now and stuff to look forward to. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think I'm really glad we're talking about this before going into the other stuff, because I think it's important. Mm-hmm. Like this is a person, he's a good person. He's good for the industry.
Yep.
He's a nice, earnest guy, and he writes books that people enjoy.
Yep.
And I think that's a really important way to kind of like a caveat to throw over everything. Because you might be asking, if you're listening to this, well, where's the controversy?
Yeah.
And the controversy is I think part of it is the hype of Sanderson, and people go, okay, there's a Sanderson guy, right? Everybody thinks he's amazing. Let me get into his books. And they start reading and it's not quite their cup of tea. And because it's the internet, people put it on blast. And they're like, man, I don't like it. And it kind of ruins a chance to have a nuanced conversation. So I figure we can do that right now. Cause I know we have some similar, some differing opinions on Sanderson's work. So, boy, where should we start?
I find his books to be really hit or miss.
All right, let's go with that.
Let's start there.
Good place.
there are some books of his that when I read them, I love them. At least on first read. Mm-hmm. I really enjoyed them. First two books of the Stormlight Archive are like S tier for me, at least when I read them. I have not gone back and read them again, so I don't know. Maybe I'd read them again and be like, bleh. But like when I first read them, they were like awesome. I loved them. You'll note I said the first two.
The first two. Yeah.
I called that out specifically because there's a lot more than 2 books in that series now.
Yeah, well, you're up to 5 now.
Yeah,
the first 3 and 4. Yeah,
yeah.
So Oathbringer was the last one, and then
I read Oathbringer. I read the third one in full and was like, eh. And then I read the fourth one, and I started to read the fourth one. I read it halfway and couldn't finish it.
Ooh,
I hated it.
A DNF.
Yeah, it was. Did not finish for me. The third one was fine. The fourth one didn't finish.
What was it? Do you remember what it was about it?
There were a few things. I felt the main thing is I felt like he needed an editor who would tell him like shut the fuck up and just get on with the story.
Is that maybe what you're saying about he's such a big person that maybe he he has the final say with stuff?
Yeah. It's like the George Lucas thing. Right? Where like, okay, the original trilogy was CGI, fantastic. Man, and the prequels. The prequels were so bad.
Come on, dude.
Like I think a guy gets huge and then people like they think they're like they're just I imagine they're just going along and continuing to do the work they always did, but then people aren't willing to tell them no. Right? They get so big that people aren't willing to be like, maybe this spot isn't good, or maybe we could fix this up. They're like, well, he's the genius.
Right.
And I think at least with books 3 and 4 of that series, I think it got to the point where I think that has started happening with his stuff. I enjoyed the original Mistborn series pretty well.
Did you read any of the 2nd gen and the 3rd gen ones?
I got them from the library and I started reading the 2nd gen one.
Well, the Alloy of Law was the first one they did after the original series was done, and that was the kind of westerny kind of one.
Yes, I started reading that one. Didn't care for it particularly. I really liked. Same here. I mean, I had issues with the original trilogy. I'm not going to say it was like perfect or something, but it was good, and I really liked the first 2 books especially. The 3rd book was solid. I didn't care for that, but I don't want to get into like every book I liked and didn't like. I don't think that's necessarily helpful. But I do think as time has gone on, I've liked his work less.
Yeah,
and it's hard for me to know whether that's me changing as a reader or whether it's genuinely his work not being kind of as like tight and like aggressively edited by professional editors. Because I think sometimes people don't understand what editors do. Editors don't just proofread you, right? A good editor will hack your book apart for things like, story beats, right? For things like plot points, for things like scenes. They'll cut scenes. They'll tell you we need a scene here that does this. They'll
using a word too many times,
Yeah. Well, that's like the end of that's once the story is set, right? We're not even talking about using the word too many times. We're talking about like a good editor, like a good professional editor will chop your story apart, or they will make you write more. They'll be like, you need scenes that do this, 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 and this. This sucks or that sucks, or like they will really delve into your story.
And that's the book's detriment sometimes. I have read books that are feel like they're over edited, and I feel like the author should have had more reign. So yeah, it's a balance, right?
It is absolutely a balance, and I feel like as Brandon Sanderson goes, he just sort of has free reign, and I don't think that's a good thing. And it's not because Brandon Sanderson sucks. It's because every author needs a good like editor like guiding them. I with like Wheel of Time, and I know he finished this book, but I'm going to talk about Robert Jordan for a second about just to comment. His wife was his editor. Like he married, and I don't mean she was his editor because he married her and she was his wife. Like she was his editor first, and they got married. Yeah. And their pairing was incredible. Robert Jordan's wife is Harriet McDougal. I just want to say that. I feel it's important to say her name. She's not just Robert Jordan's wife. Harriet McDougal is an incredible editor.
Yeah, she's amazing, and a lot of links with Brandon Sanderson too. Because they chose Brandon to finish the books after Robert Jordan passed away. And it's interesting you say that with the lack of editing for Sanderson, because that was kind of a theme of the last books. It definitely had a different feel to it. It was Sandersonized. You could tell he had some free reign with it. And I remember being slightly miffed at there's a bit of a fast and loose, like he played with the magic system a little bit. He created a character who did weird stuff with gateways. That was one of his his things that he added. And I remember it struck me kind of funny. Like that was a very Sanderson thing to do. Like, let's take this magic system and have the guy do something out of the box with it.
I feel like, and on the editor thing, just to give you a sense of how much an editor matters. Harriet McDougal is also partly responsible for Ender's Game and The Black Company, in addition to The Wheel of Time. She's done some amazing. Editors are incredibly important to the process, and I feel like there's something, or has been something. And I haven't read his most recent book, but I just feel like there's been something going on with his editing where I just don't feel like it's as tight as it needs to be. It's not as tight as it should be, and it's not as tight as it was earlier in his career. It's something that feels like it has changed as time has gone on, and I very much doubt that he's going to be listening to this episode ever. But if he does, my message would be, get an editor who's going to rein you the fuck in. And get an editor who's going to see your flaws and make you fucking change some shit.
You know what's so hard about that though is that he's only increased in popularity.
I know.
And the books continue to sell, so it's almost like if it ain't broke, don't fix it kind of thing. For Tor, the publisher, and it's interesting because maybe he is not reined in. It's like a blessing and a curse. Kind of, it gives his writing such a unique feel. It's almost a genre on its own. Like if you read a book, it's such a clear style and pace, and like you're going to get a weird, wacky magic system that's out of the box. You're going to get like some couple goofy characters that are, he's got some tropes that he goes through that are very Sandersonian tropes, but at the same time, I think, what you said earlier about, you don't know if it's getting older or not. I think that's one of my issues with Sanderson is I don't know. It's like the whole point of like, we're drinking whiskey. Like our palates have developed a little bit, and I'm a different person than I was 20 years ago when I started reading Elantris. And so for the new book coming out, I tried to reread was it Winds of Truth? Not Winds of Truth. That's a new one. I tried to reread the Stormlight Archives. I couldn't do it. And for me, it felt like going back in time to listening to like a song that you used to like and it used to really resonate with you. But then you listen to it 20 years later and you're like, I just don't feel that same way. And, the story is about, Kaladin Stormblessed, and it's kind of it's a story about a fall from grace and like getting to rock bottom and crawling yourself up and oppression. And a lot of it is about his internal journey of working through the betrayal and the feeling of hatred. And there's all these themes. And that's where some of the Mormon stuff comes out for me. It's really in his head. It's about the way he thinks about the world. And I found myself, our world's changed too. There's a lot of crazy shit going on right now in the world. And I just found myself like, I don't have the emotional capacity to do this book right now. Like I don't want to be in this dude's head. I don't want to be considering all these things. And so for me, the reread, and this is for most of his books, I have a problem with rereading them. And I don't know if there's a name for that, but once you read it, it's hard to go back and read through it again, at least for me. But I don't know what other Does that kind of sound familiar in terms of, over time and changes, and how's it hit you when you read his stuff
Yeah,
now?
I haven't tried. I will say this: I have not tried to go back and reread his stuff, even the things that I really liked.
Mm-hmm.
I just know that like the older I get, the less I like to read it, and I'll tell you that the reason I think, other than maybe he needs an editor to tighten up his work, sometimes his work is written for an extremely broad audience, both in terms of content, but also in terms of the sort of the age that he's trying to target.
Yeah, dude. Yep.
And so you end up with these books that lack what I call adult subjects. And I don't mean that in a sort of like porny sense or whatever. I mean that in like a mature emotional romantic relationships. I mean that in terms of like most of his characters don't drink. He's Mormon. They don't drink. They don't drink. They don't dance close. They don't.
Or if they do, there's like, like he created a whole system of like the safe hand in the Stormlight archives where it was almost like an ankle being exposed. So he had kind of a system in place of, but yeah, I know what you mean. That's why I thought the whiskey comparison was really astute, because it's just, I think when you've read a lot of stuff and when you've been reading for decades, you want more than that kind of narrow spectrum of experience. It's like, it almost feels to me like if you've ever been on a med that kind of keeps you from being too high or too low, and it kind of like allergy meds are like that. They keep you from getting like too happy, but I also don't get too sad. I'm kind of like right in the middle. I'm kind of like just floating through the day. That's what Sanderson novels kind of feel like to me. I'd like maybe a sordid scene or two.
I don't disagree. I agree. I think there's a spectrum of like human experience that is just missing from the books. Not just because he's Mormon. I think that's maybe part of it in some cases, but also because he's writing for even in the books where he's not writing explicitly for a young adult audience. He's also writing to maybe not totally exclude that audience. So I think there's a way in which it sort of becomes vanilla.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Where maybe some slightly different choices. Maybe chocolate would be better. Yeah. I don't want to be too hard on it, because there are some things that are really cool about his work too.
Yeah, that are not vanilla, like very fancy flavors. I mean, the magic systems come to mind first thing. Dude can create some cool magic systems.
Yeah, first thing that comes to mind is those magic systems. There, he creates some just ridiculously nuanced, interesting, hard magic systems. And I just want to define what hard magic is. So most magic in most fantasy books is what we would call soft magic. That is, it does what the author wants it to do. Basically, it's not really explained. There aren't rules that it has to obey. It just kind of exists as magical things happen. Because why? Because the author says that's how it works, right? A hard magic system, which is what Brandon Sanderson does, is a magic system where he defines very specific rules, and then everybody has to operate within those rules. He's not the only author that writes hard magic systems. He's not even the guy who invented hard magic as a thing. But he's like mastered it, perfected it.
Perfected it.
Yeah. By far the most popular guy who does it. He does it really incredibly well. He does it. His hard magic systems are so clearly defined that I don't even know I would always consider it a magic system.
Yeah. Well, it's all part of the Cosmere. It's physics in his universe, basically.
Yeah. It's alternate physics. It's almost more sci-fi than magic.
You're not wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's cool. And it's by design. And it's part of his thing, though. I mean, he is not a George R.R. Martin. George R.R.'s writing process is he sits down, he just makes shit up as he goes.
Yeah.
Brandon Sanderson's that guy who has an entire notebook like this.
Yeah.
Filled out with everything in it. He knows how the story's going to end. Every character's fleshed out. So that structure is there, and it shows up in the magic system. And And yeah, it's really cool to kind of get your brain wrapped around it. It's very inventive stuff. And it's novel, which I really appreciate about it. Stuff he writes you just never read about before. What was it in the Mistborn books? You swallow a metal.
Yeah, everybody's an allomancer.
Yeah,
right. You drink the metal.
Specific types, each metal does something different. And you burn it inside of you, and it gives you can do different stuff with it.
Yeah,
it's all weird stuff.
Yeah, some of it's really weird stuff. That it's some of it's very specific stuff that seems like it doesn't work. But then if you do multiple metals, you can get different effects. It's
complicated, man. And they do some cool shit with it.
Yeah, it's a very interesting system. I enjoyed that in Mistborn. I enjoyed it, at least at first. I enjoyed it in the system that they have in the Stormlight Archive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they suck in the Stormlight, right? And then they can
use it for things. But as that one has sort of went on, I liked it less. But I don't really want to get into too many details about exactly. But even so, like, it's the point though is that he's incredible at writing these systems and then writing how they work and being creative in them. And it's one of the highlights of his books.
Yeah.
I think the other thing he does really well is his world building.
Oh, it's excellent.
Yeah. It's I think he learned from the master and from the notes of the master, right? Which was Robert Jordan. I think that when he got access to all the materials, because Robert Jordan is one of these architect writers, like he is, where you like have notebooks and binders full of detailed information about your world. Is I think when he got access to that, I think it sort of opened up like how detailed you could be, how you could approach it, and how you could.
Which is ironic, because then he wrote the books that you didn't care for. After
he wrote some of them that the only thing that he'd published before that, I mean, he'd published a few books, but he'd only published the first book, for example, of
Way Kings was out.
Way Kings was not out.
You sure?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like I'm very sure.
Or something. Oh no, I'm showing it was 2010.
Yep. Yeah. No, Way of Kings was out after he was done with Robert Jordan. It was the only things he'd published were Elantris, and he'd published the first Mistborn when he dove into that. When he dove into that whole thing.
Oh man, dude, I remember thinking that. I was like, why'd they choose the Mistborn guy?
Yeah,
it was okay. Right? It was good, but I mean, the world. Here's the thing. I mean, Elantris was still, because I remember reading it. It was very Sanderson. I didn't know it at the time, but it was like some Sanderson ass shit, because it was great world building. Prose was it's fine. I always had to get used to Sanderson. I talked to you about this a little bit. Like I have to dip myself in to get used to it, and then it's like my brain switches over and I get it. But yeah, Elantris was engaging and it was good. And I think I see, like, if they saw that, they saw Mistborn, I can see what they were finding. But yeah, the couple things that niggled me about his writings, like even some of the names, like the people that lived in Elantris were called the Elantrians.
Mm-hmm.
And there's some stuff like that with the naming. That's another thing you have to get used to with Sanderson writing, because the names he chooses, like when you first read them, I get kind of an eye roll. I'm like, oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then you start to appreciate it later, because you have other authors who have really fun names. But like with the Goblin Emperor, like, oh, that's really inventive. Yeah. And then after a while, you're like, who the fuck are these people?
Yeah. Yeah.
But that again, that's Sanderson's like appeal, and is something that I think people give him a lot of shit for. It's pretty easy to remember the names and stuff because
they're pretty basic.
Yeah. They get a little weird though. I mean, there was like Moash and
that's like
Dalinar
that's the Moash. That's like some of those names. That's like the Book of Mormon influence, right? Where like,
yeah. You get to see in there.
Yeah, and I think that that comes back to sort of one of the complaints that a lot of people have, which is like the prose.
Yeah,
the prose are mid. They serve the story, but they're not excellent. He's not trying to be. I don't think. I hope he's not. I think
It's purposeful. There's quotes on it. I'm going to look it up.
He's trying to make it inoffensive, like this whiskey over here. He's trying to make it readable, not overly complicated, just basic.
Mm-hmm.
Not all of his stuff, again, is explicitly young adult, but frankly, all of it's young adult. You know what I mean? Like really all of it is actually young adult in terms of the quality of this stuff, in terms of the quality of the writing. I don't mean the good, bad quality, just like its characteristics.
So the quote I'm thinking of, and maybe you can remember it, it's basically this, the idea of the stained glass window. And if you're looking at the art through a window, the prose is the window. And you can either have a clear window or like a stained glass window that colors what the person thinks about the art on the other side. And so Brandon's philosophy is that it should be a clear window.
Mm-hmm.
So the prose should be simple. You should be able to see through it. And then you get to observe the art directly instead of having the author kind of modify how you see it.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting philosophy because when you read it, I mean, when he describes, it feels off, and it doesn't feel, it's not, the prose just isn't what kind of you're used to in general. It's very, very simple. There's a lot of examples of it that I think you can look up because so many people have bitched about it.
Yeah.
But he describes what happens, and then he lets you kind of make the decision on what you think about it.
Yeah. I would say as a writer who's wildly unsuccessful, remarkable in my lack of success so far, remarkable in my, and probably not remarkable at all in my lack of success, but I have absolutely no success as a writer other than doing the writing, which is kind of success in and of itself. But as a writer, I couldn't disagree more with that philosophy of writing. I think the writing is the art, period. Like, period. Whatever the writing is, that's the art that you've made. You're not making visual art. There's no fucking window on it.
So you're saying there's no art behind the window. The art is like the stained glass window.
Art is the stained glass window. Are you making a clear window for somebody to just like look through? Like, is it vapid, shallow, or are you painting a picture with your words?
Dude, I would think of the Black Tongue Thief with its prose.
Mm-hmm.
When you read it, like the first paragraph comes out, and you just it's art. You can feel it, you can see it. It's cinematic. You can see it in your head.
Yeah.
And here's the weird thing, though. So with Sanderson, it's not like that right away, but I can get there. And that was my question to you. So I finished all the stuff. I think I enjoyed the third and fourth one. I wanted to reread them to see if I would again, but I don't think I can make it.
Yeah.
But the way I've always felt about Sanderson is it's all these things niggle at me, the names, the prose for like the first quarter of the book. And then just a flip switches in my brain. And I can't read anything but Sanderson.
A flip switches. Nice.
Did I say that? Yes.
Yeah.
All the way through my whiskey here.
I was just making sure. Did you mean to say a flip switches, or did you? So it kind of makes sense,
Well, yeah, it's like a flippy thing that switches. I don't know. Oh boy, it is 8:30 here. That's for a person with a small child, that's getting close to pajama time. But no, every time I read his books, it's like that. The last one I read was Spence. It's not in the Cosmere, but it's a young adult sci-fi kind of deal.
Yeah, haven't read that one, so I can't.
They're cool. Yeah. Got all, it's very Sanderson, but it's always the same way. I read the book, first quarter of it, I'm just like rolling my eyes through it. I'm like, oh god, another goofy character who makes terrible jokes. Then the humor kind of, I'm like, and then I get halfway through it, and then I just love the characters, and then I'm just like, haha, they're so funny. I love how quirky they are. To read anything else, I have to switch back out of that. I have to de-Sandersonize my brain. So something he does, it works, but it takes work to get into the mode. I think that might be my unique take on his stuff. Is I think it's not great until I really bathe in it. And then like all I could think about. It's great. That's God, the last time I really did the reread was the last time a Stormlight book came out.
Mm-hmm.
And I hit my 40 mark and I just couldn't make it through the Way of Kings. So
I can't do rereads like when a new book in a series comes out. I can't do rereads like that. I can't
I did
reread
with Carl.
the whole series. I know, and I can't do that. I mean, I can reread like a book or a series or something.
Yeah.
But
it's hard to do.
But not when it's like not when the new one comes out. I just want to read it.
Oh man.
I got too much shit. To read. Like go back and read something just so I can read the next one.
Oh, dude, I forgot so much though. I'm doing the Carl reread right now, and there were so many little nuances because his books are so packed with nuances.
Well, we're going to talk about that next.
Yeah, we'll talk about that more. But I guess the other thing I had to say was, I know so the Wheel of Time is the other book that I reread about every 5-6 years or so.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, that book is like walking me through life. Every time I read it, I see something new. I feel kinship with a different character.
Yeah.
Like this latest one, all the boys just like, ugh, doing boy stuff. And I find myself, I'm the same age as some of the older characters in there, and I can see it from their perspective. And I really appreciate Robert Jordan's writing for that.
Yeah.
But yeah, with Sanderson, it just feels different. It feels, I think, what you were talking about with the broad appeal.
Yeah.
It's hard for me to latch on to anything. Like I can't, when I reread it and it was the perspective of like the king.
Yeah.
I didn't find myself, like identifying with the king more. There wasn't enough substance there. There wasn't enough art. And it's just missing some of that magic for me where it's very meaningful. So yeah, I don't know. I don't want to bring it down, but I do. makes me a little sad, man, because I like to find meaning in my books. I want to find a book that I can read and feel connected to and stuff.
Even when I've really enjoyed his books, I felt like there was sort of something missing. It's sort of like when you meet somebody, there's just something that there's just not something not quite there behind the eyes. You know what I mean? Like,
oof, yeah.
Yeah, I feel that way about Brandon Sanderson's writing. I just feel like there's some depth missing to it. It's like popular. It's like it's written to be popular. It's kind of shallow. It feels shallow.
Yeah.
Sort of wide but shallow. We talked about that with his world building. About some people are like narrow but deep. With the Goblin Emperor, we talked about that, like narrow but deep world building versus that wide but shallow. And Brandon Sanderson is like that classic wide but shallow. He can describe like a culture, a society, give rules for that society, and he can do all this stuff. But then but there's no real like depth to it. He can't dive in deeply to one culture. He just describes like 10 different ones, kind of, reasonably well.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and dude, that's so interesting because I'm thinking of the Stormlight Archives because that's kind of the theme here with the new book coming out, and like I'm thinking of the characters. And we've talked about it a few times. I'm a moody reader, and I feel like I love books that I can connect with the characters on some level. Mm-hmm. But these books, yeah, like what you said about the light missing behind the eyes. It's like meeting someone who they're kind of incapable of deep connections.
Yeah,
you're like, okay, we're meeting, we're smiling, we're laughing, we're talking, but we both know this isn't. We're not going to be friends.
Yeah,
so it doesn't seem like a thing, but. I think and that's the thing though, you get so inside their heads. The characters have so much backstory. Like Kaladin just goes through hell and you're with him while he falls from grace and works himself up and goes through all this stuff. And, when you see him do stupid shit, you get frustrated, you see the character growth. By all definitions, you should feel something for the character. But when I think of Kaladin, it's more like, Kaladin. Kind of an emo. Yeah. He's a bit of an edgelord. He makes dumb decisions.
Yeah.
I wish he and the stuff that's like a big deal for him to learn are things that I learned like years ago without having to go through the stuff he did. So that's kind of frustrating too. They're like these really deep emotional things that he goes through. And when I read them, I'm like, I guess. Yeah, there's just something, like you said, something missing. Like, I'm going to read the new book. I'm going to really enjoy it. And when I get to it, because I like to support Brandon just because of who he is and what he represents. But yeah, for going recommend, not recommend, boy, there's a lot of caveats.
There are a lot of caveats there. I think he's worth trying. I recommend that everybody try him. Because if he's for you, he's got a lot of cool shit. Even for somebody like me who I read some of his stuff, really liked it, and then I got further into it and kind of decided I didn't like some of his newer stuff. There's a lot there. Maybe it's for you. It's for a lot of people. It's very popular.
Yeah. You'll never run out of material,
Yeah. There's always something new coming out. There's also, there is also some stuff that's pretty good there. It's pretty cool and it's pretty original. That magic stuff, if you are into hard magic systems and all the rules that go with it and all that stuff, it's absolutely for you. I honestly just personally kind of got over that stuff as time went on, but the novelty when I first started reading it, I think helped the novelty of all those because of how detailed it gets. Like I said, there are other hard magic systems in other writers' series before him, but nobody at the point where he started getting published, nobody was doing that kind of level of hard magic. He just sort of set a new bar for it, right?
Yeah, he did.
So, and there's not very many people even today who do what he does in terms of that. So,
yeah, anyway. I agree with all that. And my extra caveat, my own advice to potential readers is to give yourself a little extra time to get Sandersonized and get into the headspace. It is a thing. Your flip might get switched also. Like mine was.
Yeah.
And if anything, read it just for that sensation, because that is kind of a cool sensation. I think he's the only author that I can think of off the top of my head that's ever done that, where, usually an author, if they don't hook you right away, kind of hooks you enough. He's got some good hooks. He's a good author. He does stuff. I've heard mutterings that there's going to be a Stormlight Archives show picked up soon.
That'd be cool. I would actually like to see that. At least the first.
Could be sweet.
Yeah, could be cool. Yeah. Except it could also go the way that so many others have gone, and it could just be
Wheel of Time.
Yeah. Speaking of which, I saw some news. I saw some news today that season 3 of the Amazon Wheel of Time show is going to be coming out. I want to say early next year in March or something.
Man.
Maybe we'll do a third book episode. Maybe we'll do an episode.
That'll be in person too.
About the yeah.
I'll be there
in March. This would be in March. Would you be here?
Shit.
No. You're going to be here in
July.
The
hot. Well, not hot there, but
anyway.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll do the third book of that series, even though we didn't do the first 2 books.
I'm down, man.
Yeah.
Can't wait to torture myself weekly by watching the show, which I will watch it.
Oh yeah.
But I'm not going to like it.
I don't feel like the Wheel of Time show is that bad. It is not Witcher bad. The show.
I'm still not over the changes they made the parents' character that I felt were just.
Oh yeah, no
nonsensical.
I'm not saying it's great. I'm not saying they haven't changed some shit, but at least so far, it's not. I'm not going to watch the next season bad so far.
Well, shoot, man, I feel pretty good about it. I think we went over the pros. We went over the controversy. I think we still gave him a really good shake of being just an awesome, prolific author dude.
Awesome dude, awesome author. Yeah, crazy, prolific. Does some really cool things really well. Isn't perfect. Is that a fatal flaw? He's not walking on water.
He's a Kirkland brand Islay Scotch.
Yeah, solid, inoffensive. Yep. Mass appeal.
Prolific. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Prolific. Yes. This Costco size bibliography.
Oh man. I think it's better than saying he's the Costco hot dog.
Oh man. I don't think we need to go there. Yeah. All right.
All right, man.
Well, thank you all for listening. Hope you have a good night, and I hope you'll join us for the next one.
And stay gold.